get that started. Okay, so it has been about a month since we have done these, and I feel like I'm kind of getting back in the, we've been working on all sorts of other projects with IRC, but we were kind of hoping that after we did all those webinars that we would give you guys a chance to not feel like your Tuesday morning was always booked up with us, and that you could really focus on those strategies and techniques that you needed to be able to do to change, you know, this ID&R and the new norm. And so it seems like things have not changed a bunch as far as, you know, improvement in a lot of areas. So what I thought we would talk about today is I'm just gonna give a short bit of information about some ag trends and some things that we're really seeing that is directly impacting agriculture. We're gonna talk a little bit about worker health, a few new places that you can get ag data that are just some new resources that we've come across, and just some suggestions of, you know, working in the pandemic, and a new scenario resource that we have for recruiters to just kind of do a little bit of testing to make sure that they're comfortable with different scenarios and situations. And it's just a new mini quiz that we have online. So I will pay attention to the chat box. And so if someone has a question or a comment, you need to use the chat box. So if you raise your hand or if you try to put it somewhere else, I won't notice, but go ahead and put that in the chat box and I'll pay attention to that. So I appreciate all you guys joining us. I hope that the information that we share will be able to be something beneficial to you all. So the main thing that we're seeing across the country is we're seeing a lot more articles about worker health. About a month ago, 2 months ago, you know, this was a concern of what happens if farm workers do get sick, and they're real concerned about close quarters and places where they're, you know, the way that they have to work. And now one of the biggest, I'm on a lot of different listservs that give information about agriculture, and the biggest thing that I'm seeing is just in lots of places, they're seeing lots of outbreaks with workers in worker housing or at specific farms. I live in Tennessee, and not too far from here, about an hour and 20 minutes away, there is a farm that literally pretty much all the workers were infected. Now, not all of them are symptomatic, but this is a real concern for communities of, you know, are workers coming from one place and moving to another, and are they already sick? Or, you know, how do you recruit and make sure that you're safe? And so we're seeing, this is just an article, just a couple of screenshots from an article from yesterday that are showing in a lot of our places that the numbers are going up, you know, a lot. Like in Tennessee, for example, there's 550 new cases a day. In Arizona, there's 1,245 new cases a day. So this is problematic for areas that are trying to open up and say, okay, we're going to try to send recruiters out. Or, you know, what does opening up really look like? Tennessee is one of those states, you know, a lot of the states in the South have been open. Florida is seeing 1,661 new cases a day. So this is something that we're kind of watching, like IRC, for example, we do what we call TRI events, where we go out and help other states, where we bring recruiters in and help other states to be able to, you know, work on recruitment efforts. Well, we've halted all of those just because it's really hard for us to say, well, I'm going to send a recruiter from North Carolina to Arizona when, you know, we may not know what's going on in our community. So this is just showing that we very much are still very, you know, in the middle of this, as we all know, but we can very much pay attention to those states that are close to us, and also where our families are coming and, you know, moving back and forth. So we've seen a lot of, one of the things that we have done as IRC is we have COVID-19 kits that we've made that are just, you know, simple supplies that can be given to farm workers that, you know, that migrant programs are using in different areas. And we really saw the need for that because we felt like families are not able to get those resources. So I would suggest you don't have to use ours, but are we as program helping provide some of those resources that maybe your people are having a really hard time finding? And I thought this article was something to think about. It talked about just the heat that, you know, families are, you know, workers are dealing with right now, and then adding the use of a mask on top of that, of just what a real challenge that is. And so we're seeing across the country more and more articles of just, you know, I'm going to share several of them right here, and I will put the presentation on the webinar page on IRC, and all of these have a direct link to the information that's right. You know, when you open the screen, you can click on the picture and it'll take you to the article. And all of these articles are from within the last week or so. So we're also seeing a lot of places there's more strikes with workers. I know Washington, this has been a big thing, and more people really demanding, saying, hey, we need more protective supplies. We need masks, we need gloves, we need disinfectant. And so people have said, the workers are working at a time that they can't go get these supplies. And then this extra added burden of these costs is a real challenge for them. And so this is now becoming, workers were kind of on the back burner as far as what their concerns were, and now it's becoming something that's really a large, real concern across the country. So Florida, for example, just as of yesterday, had an article saying that they think that all of their new cases, that a lot of them were either due to farm workers or due to long-term care facilities. Now, the Department of Agriculture says that's not correct. A lot of the farm workers have already headed out, but they have a lot of areas where they're seeing outbreaks in communities that, just due to the housing conditions and, how close people are, and just how hard it is to kind of control that. And so when we talk about trends that are directly impacting, we have the things that we've talked about in the past as far as supply chain disruption from, United States. We had two food supply chains, one for restaurants and schools and one for, just the supermarket. And so we've seen, like Florida, for example, has had a lot of farms that haven't been able to sell all their produce, and they're trying to find new areas and channels to sell that. But at the same time, this real threat of not having enough workers. And then, in other places, you have the workers, but they're sick. And what are the protocols? Maybe they're not even sick, but they've got, they've been tested and they see that they have COVID-19. Where do we go from there? And so this is really starting. We're seeing a lot more departments of health working directly with farmers, working directly with agribusiness. Started with the meat processing plants, still very much continuing across the country with the meat processing plants. But that, is something that we all have to keep in our minds as we're trying to reach out to farms at this time, that they're under a tremendous pressure from a lot of different areas to still stay profitable, to still make sure their workers are safe, to still make sure they have a supply channel where they're sending and selling their things. So, this, for example, in this, this was on Bloomberg, and this was one of the farms in Tennessee that I'd mentioned that, that every single one of its workers had become infected. New Jersey is another one where they keep mentioning just the sheer amount of workers that have been infected. And so it's just really, it says here, farm workers are getting sick and spreading the illness just as the U.S. heads into the peak of the summer produce season. So we've got recruiters trying to figure out how do we work with farms? How do we get referrals? So it's just, I feel like it's just kind of like a snowball. It just keeps getting bigger and bigger of all these challenges that we have. But at the same time, we know that workers are moving. So, at one point people said, well, do you think that they'll move? We do see them moving across the country to different places. But we're just, this is the new norm. So here are, just two more. I think I saw one of you from the county, this county in Gainesville. They're seeing that they're, specifically more and more cases. And so these are just articles, again, that you can read and learn a little bit more. And there are ways that you can do a Google News alert, for example, for your own community to be able to go in and see what's specifically happening right around you. So here's another farm. There was a farm in Ray County, and there's a farm in another place in Tennessee. But this particular farm, I actually got an article this morning that was talking about all the community agencies that had worked with these workers were not supposed to be leaving the farm. And so all of these different agencies kind of came together to donate and say, hey, here's a lot of supplies for your workers. So in some cases, in some places across the country, we have migrant programs that are specifically trying to be part of that effort. So if you want to reach out to the farm, you're also part of that effort to, try to coordinate supplies or help, get that to families so that, that's a way to kind of reach out. And so we're seeing this in a lot of places. So here, just a couple more, articles. This is mentioning both Florida, North Carolina, and Washington. And those are states that we're hearing a lot about, those three. But then those are also states where a lot of workers come, and they may work part of the time in North Carolina or part of the time in Washington and work somewhere else. And so it's just, I feel like it's just really concerning that, of how we work with them, and also at the same time, what safety measures are available, and the kind of information that we're sharing with families. I've heard recruiters say, I wish I could better inform families of, how they can protect themselves. And so These are just very different issues than we had several months ago, but I don't think it's going to go away very fast at all. So, here's an example of, in California, of some of the ways that, you wouldn't have seen this picture from the LA Times. You wouldn't have seen that several months ago, but now they're starting to directly try as much as possible to get this. And I thought this statement here, it says, this director of this Family Resource Center said that her organization delivers weekly supplies to farm workers during their lunch breaks, offering free food, wipes, and hands and sanitizers. I can't even talk this morning. Sanitizer. And she says many can't afford such items or are too busy working to buy them when they're in stock. And I know our program is not just a supplier of stuff, but I also think that, we really have to be mindful of exactly what people are facing at this time. So shifting a little bit to a different subject, meat packing was last month and the month before, we were really hearing about a lot of closures all over the country due to just how many workers were getting sick. And that is still happening. It is happening in some areas, like for example, in Utah, they just had a plant that closed due to high number of workers getting sick. And there was an executive order by the president saying, look, this is, these are essential businesses. They need to stay open. They can't close. But they are still saying that most of the meatpacking companies across the country still have lots and lots of workers that are not showing up. Sometimes it's as much as 1/3 of their workers. And so they're saying that, a lot of us can go to the grocery store and see that there's not a lot of meat and, stocked up there, but it says meat production has rebounded from its low point. It's where dozens of plants were closed, and some of the largest plants were closed, but now they're still seeing plant closures across the country, but they're thinking it's not going to impact it as much, but there still is that huge backlog of, pigs and cattle that they're not seeing it as much in poultry because it's a little bit more automated than it is with beef. But this is still something that we're seeing, and very much the workers in those plants are still very much impacted by what's happening. And so this is just a few, I won't read this whole thing, but there was just, it says, it mentions here, it says earlier this week, beef, pork, and poultry plants were operating at more than 95% of last year's levels, which was up from about 60% in April. So they feel like the height of their plant closures were kind of in April, and they're hoping that that will just improve, and that, and then it mentions on the next page that in the next little section that pig farmers have been really hit hard because of the tight capacity. I know a lot of us have seen articles that, pigs are ready at a certain time at a certain weight, and then they're ready to go for slaughter. And then when the slaughtering plants were not open, then that really caused a kind of a bottleneck. And it said that poultry plants, due to them being more automated, they haven't seen as many virus outbreaks and closures, and their production only went down about 5%. And so we are still seeing those plants close, and so you want to kind of pay attention in your areas of what's happening with that, especially if you're trying to reach out to plants and still continue to get referrals. And then at the same time, they have the 4 largest meat packers have been accused of conspiring to inflate beef prices. So during when all this was happening, as far as why are the plants closing, and the president puts his executive order, and they were noticing in a lot of the communities that the local farmer is not getting what he needs as far as to make, just production costs for his cows, but somehow in the middle, they're still making money. And so the Justice Department is currently looking at the 4 biggest meat packers in the country to look to see if there's any violations of antitrust issues. And so this is going on right now. And if you look a little bit farther down in the article, it says meat packing is highly consolidated with 4 companies. That's Tyson, that's JBS, that's Cargill, and National Beef, that control 80% of the U.S. beef processing market. So they're just wondering, they're looking into this. I don't know what what will happen with this, but it's something that they're really concerned about. One thing to think about with labor being a major issue in a lot of places, this was something that the USDA came out with back this is a statistics from, not this year, this was 2018, but they just submitted this and sent this and said that if you take a look at the hired farm labor costs with total cash expenses, specialty crops definitely has, their labor is 40% of their cost. And this was back in 2018, so we know that it's gone up since then. So what that means for those of us that, states where you're, working with specialty crops. Now, specialty crops is usually what you and I eat. So these are things like lettuce and fruit and vegetables. And you can just see this huge amount of need that they have for labor. And so those are farms right now that are really struggling with trying to figure out, it's not as mechanized. You can see a lot of this does need, dairy is 15% of their total cost is due to farm labor, but specialty crops, it's at least 40%. And so this is really something just to kind of keep in mind. We know that, but it's just, you can kind of look at just the huge difference of, how many workers are needed to bring those crops in. So thinking about some ag data, some new resources for ag data, some of these are just, that kind of, we've done a lot of things in the past about, I believe we have a webinar that specifically puts probably 20 different resources that you can use to go find ag data from, like Manta and, there's just lots and lots of them that are on these were just a couple new ones that we came across. So some of these I think for states will be very beneficial, and some you may find just 2 or 3 for your state. But we really believe in the importance of tracking the farms that are in your area, paying attention to the kind of crops that you have, making sure that that, okay, that's just a family farm and this is not really, where workers come. These are, you've got to know the differences. If someone gives you a list of all the farms in your state, to know which ones you really need to follow up with and which ones are ones that really won't, have any qualifying families or youth. So they have been working a bunch on updating the local food registries. And so this is something done through USDA. That is trying to improve just the farm to community resources that are out there. And so there's been a big push recently to make sure that all your CSAs, and that's your community supported agriculture, some states that has absolutely nobody that would qualify for our program, and in other states we're starting to see that there are some larger community supported agriculture farms that are bringing in, that are using some labor that is eligible. There also is what's called a food hub. So this is if your organization is involved in this group of helping to distribute food, which could be helpful in your community if there is a need to try to get extra food out to families. And then there is what's called the on the farm market. So farms that can actually, people come and just buy directly from the farm. So on this particular link, you can kind of explore it for your state and say, okay, what's right in my particular area? Do I know these CSAs? Are these anything that, that could potentially have any eligible families, or is this just something that's a good, resource to know in my community? Same thing for the food hubs. And so you can kind of take a look at that. Here's an example of, just kind of once you get to the local food directories, for example, you can go in and put a zip code and try to look at how many miles close, and it'll give you a list. These are just ones close to where I am. A lot of these are family farms. Some of them are larger farms, but you can actually see them on a little map that will take you, and you can take a look around. So I just included this in because I know they have that big push to include more farms, and there's more of an interest of farms now to be included on that. And so some of those ones that may not have been listed in the past are now there. And this just can help you in your, in your search to try to make sure that you have all farms in your area listed, and that you know kind of what's going on at those. This is another place that you can kind of find that. There also is a very random, for them, I'm sure it's not random, but it's just farms that do a lot of grass-fed, which I have not seen a lot of families on, but they have specific different types of dairies and different types of smaller quantities of meat, and pretty comprehensive lists of places all over that, the country that have different types of food that are available. And so it's just another, and they include the, the listing of the place. And so we thought, well, we'll include this in because it is one more place that you can check out and see if it's possible that, that you might see. Another thing I know that we've mentioned before, but I don't know if people are using it as much as they can, is the meat, poultry, and egg production inspection directory. So this is a directory from the USDA of all of the different establishments that they go and check. And it has things specifically like, beef slaughter, pork, lamb, goat, sheep, the egg products, things that are before processed. So it's anything that if it's a facility that they're at any point are going to go and visit and inspect, it's included in this. And so this is a pretty good, it's a pretty in-depth database of all of these different types of businesses that could possibly, it's more like agribusiness, that could possibly be eligible. So I would suggest, I may even just go, I think most people have seen this, but if you have not, when you get there, it looks like this. And you kind of think, okay, well, how do I do this? You can search specifically by region or by state. But what I like to do is just kind of look down here and just do the establishment by name and just pull down the Excel spreadsheet and just kind of look at everybody they have. And this is a big, huge spreadsheet. And when you do, you can then, you can kind of sort it out by state. Probably super tiny, you probably can't see it very well. But you can kind of sort it by state and just pull out that information. But it'll tell you, okay, this place, 3D Meats in Dalton, Ohio. Let's see if I can make it bigger. It'll say, okay, they do meat processing, poultry processing, and then it'll give you other names, and it may say, Texas chili, and you may get there and say, this is way past the initial processing. But it is a pretty comprehensive list, and you can, take a look and see exactly what your state, is available in your state, and they do update this pretty frequently. So I would suggest that when you get a moment, that you go through and you check that, and it will tell you that, it's been updated, and, this was just updated by June 8th. So if you only look at it once a year, there's probably some more things that are on there, or ones that were taken off if they're no longer on there. So just something to kind of think about to make sure that you're able to use that resource. Let's go back to where I was. Okay. So if you have any comments, questions, because of the amount of people that we have on, we usually, we don't have a ton of other voices on here, but if you want to say something or something that you've used this, or you want to have a comment, please feel free to add that in the chat box. Okay, so here there also is some information we just talked about the 4 largest meat processors. There is Tyson by far is still #1. They have over 100 plants, and so we're going to kind of be watching what happens with this antitrust just to see how that impacts. And I had talked to someone recently that when they reached out to the farm or out to one of the agribusinesses like a Tyson, they said, hey, we kind of reached out and said, hey, I know that there's kind of some bad press right now that's going on. This is what our program does. Is there a way that we can work with you? It might be a way that you can kind of share that you're giving back to the community. So they were using that angle to kind of talk to the plant and say, hey, I know there's a lot of crazy things going on, but this is one way that you could help your workers. So it's just, no matter what we're doing, it's important that we're following the people that we work with. We're following the businesses that we work with, so we know, what is their reality, and, why is a farm owner so grouchy when you show up? You should kind of know all of those different pressures that that are happening. And at the same time, it's good for us to know how everything's connected. And so this is just an interesting article that's really showing, how things are ranked. And you can take a look at some of the plants that you have. They put, all of the top 100 meat and processors on there, and a little bit of information about that. And so you can kind of check that out. There are also some national maps at this particular website. This website is really against factory farms. So it's their whole information is to really put, what their stance is on, on large farms. But for our purposes, it helps us really be able to kind of see, if you're not aware of everything, that you're specifically, maybe you're brand new to migrant and you're wondering, how does your state stack up to other states? They're specifically taking a look at places that have large numbers of cows, large numbers of dairy cows, hogs, egg-laying hens, chickens, and saying, hey, these are where we consider the factory farms to be. And so, for example, in the state where I live, I could look and say, okay, there's a moderate, it's showing the specific county, this yellow, what is that? And so I can kind of think, what's going on. But you see certain parts of the country are very much specifically have lots and lots of, particular different types of animals. So they have some maps that they go through to show, okay, here's where the hogs are. And if, back, same thing, if I was working in Tennessee, I would be thinking, what's this little yellow over here? What is that? Am I aware of, what that is? And then they've got dairy cows, broiler chickens. And so a lot of us know where these are. It just depends on, specifically, making sure that you're aware and then figuring out what business that is. So we had a question on any suggestions on how best to contact them. Due to all the normal restrictions in place, we are not allowed on site and contacting has not worked. So that, I think, is something that you very much have to be very strategic at this point. I was working on something for a state that was specifically saying, how do we reach out to farms? How do we, reach out? And I think that one of the things that we miss a lot of times in migrant ed is marketing. We expect to just be able to pick up the phone and try to call and say, okay, hey, can we get in? And now it's extremely hard to do that. So one thing that we do have for IRC, that is, all states are available, can have, if you're going to join IRC, we're just opening it up, and you can, if your state was one of those ones that was in our application, you can just have access to this. And if you're an IRC state, we do have an electronic survey tool. So basically, if you are able to if you already have partnerships with farms, and it's not too hard. So you can reach out and say, hey, if you got any new workers, then it's in English and it's also in Spanish. And they can go in and, and send some information as far as a, possible person that might qualify. If not, you're going to have to really sit down. There's all sorts of ways that you can reach out to them, but you're going to have to sit down and figure out a marketing plan to say, okay, do we first send out, is it the best thing to just pick up the phone and call them? Probably not. Do you come up with some flyers and say, for example, with the COVID kits that we were using, I know of states that are using those literally to reach out and say, hey, we have some resources for families that are eligible for our program, and this includes, masks, protective gloves, things. But we do have to make sure that they're eligible, and we do provide this for free. And so then farmers will say, well, there's no way I can, really let you on site. Well, is there a way that I could, maybe talk to, somebody's in charge, or maybe I could drop off flyers that could be put with their checks, or maybe I could put a flyer on their car, or maybe I could mail you some, we're going to have to come up with 50 different ideas of how we could possibly, get in, but it's not going to look like us showing up at the door and saying, can I get in? And so I do know that some places are using this tool. Some places are using those kits as a way to say, hey, we've got some protective equipment that could be used. Some are doing some Zoom training on with farms on for workers on how to actually protect themselves from COVID. And so they're able to channel in and put a bilingual person to say, hey, these are some things that you can do. But I guarantee picking up a phone and just calling a plant right now is not going to get us in. But that's where you can work also with your local contacts at the local school system. See if anybody knows somebody who works at the plant or that's somewhere higher up that can get you a chance to talk to somebody. But I think the principles of marketing, of really being deliberate and how can we reach out to them? Do we have a presence on, social media? Are we on the radio? Are we doing some mailings to particular areas of our counties that might have families? Like, do we have some really good materials that can be mailed out, that can be strategically mailed to certain places? And we'll talk about that in just a second. But we'll definitely have to do things a little bit different. But this little tool, when we have a whole webinar about using this, but that is something that is available for free to states if that is something that is helpful. So I guess we're kind of transitioning onto the question that was just asked, how are we changing things? And so if I've already talked about it, I'll probably kind of try to skip this, but I think one of the challenges we have in migrant education to begin with is our use of using the school more than we use farm and agribusiness. And then when the schools close, now we have major challenge to say, hey, we still can find people in the community through targeted mailings and targeted resources specifically to specific areas. But now we've got to figure out how to work with farms and agribusinesses with not being able to show up on their front door. So you have to figure out, is there a way that you can get more surveys to new workers? Is there a way that you can work with farms in their application package? Do you have the resources that a farmer would and an agribusiness person would consider helpful. I think we always go from our perspective of, we have brochures for our migrant families, we have brochures that are geared towards the school, but do we have resources that if it was mailed to a farmer or sent electronically to a farmer, that they would say, this is a program that I need to contact? Or is this something saying, hey, this doesn't have anything to do with me, I'm, go talk to the school. So we have to market our program in a way that the farmer or the agribusiness would say, yeah, this is somebody that I want to keep their information close. So I do know in some states they've said, well, we've reached out to farms and said if they need training, we can only do it via virtual trainings, but this is something where farmers have said, I'm not even sure where to start with this, and so they've been able to do some of those trainings for them. Social media is extremely important for reaching out to families, and you can actually target specific demographics. If you really want to get into how to reach out and put ads, you can do that too. But at the same time, do we provide, it's using social media and providing high quality programming during these times online? What is it that we're providing? We can't just say, well, we do online services. What is it that our farms and our community will really want to learn more about? And then there's this idea of mailing specific materials or pamphlets or brochures to specific places in your communities to target certain apartment complexes or certain houses or certain businesses. And so there are a lot of different companies or tools that are out there, like USPS, the post office has a way that you could particularly say, hey, I want to mail this, this particular, they don't care what it is you're mailing, but you can go to and talk with them about a specific area that you want to send program information to. If your migrant families usually live in a certain area and you can't go directly to them, can you do some targeted marketing where you get material, get a really good pamphlet or really good information that is sent out to them that they'll then contact you? I've seen that same strategy used with the personal protective equipment, with the bags, to be able to say, hey, if you qualify for this program, you might be eligible for this or this or this. Call so-and-so to find out. And then they get that strategy has worked for years with materials like want to learn English, call this number, you might be eligible. So those are some things where you're actually using resources. Maybe use a company, maybe use just the post office, but you figure out a way to do direct mailing to places that, that your families have lived in the past. When I worked in Tennessee, we always kept what we called an old address database, where we could pull down every address that we used to have for migrant families, and we'd go back and check and say, hey, is this still an old address that we need to keep on the, is this still migrant housing, or is this now no longer migrant housing and there's a permanent, this has changed? And so we could actually target those particular places and actually have a list of all of those. So we would send a mailing and say, hey, you could possibly be eligible. So those are some things that you want to think. If we can't show up at their door, maybe it can show up in their box, but we're going to have to learn a little bit more about how to actually be a little bit more strategic about that, to try to get something that they then will call us about. So this is an example. You don't have to use this, but this is an example of how, with marketing, how you can actually, like you can get lists of school principals from across the country through some companies where they'll say, oh, here's all the school principals, or here's all the Title I person, or here's all the, well, this one is and I just put it on here as a sample of when we're changing our ideas of how to market to the people we're trying to reach to, that there are some resources out there. So this particular company actually mines all the farm data that's available of farmers from across the country. And so you can actually request a list and see a sample before you ever buy it. And I'm not saying you have to do this, but this is an example of something we might not have done before the pandemic, where they say, okay, you want to market to farms, this is what we do. So what they do is actually, you tell them, I'm really interested in all the dairy farms, or I'm really interested in, all of the specialty farms in my state. Do you have that? And they go on and say, yeah, you can search this, and they'll give you a sample, and you decide if you want to buy it to then be able to send information out to farms. You do not have to go that way in any way at all. I'm just showing you that there are some things out there that this is what they do. They market to different groups and try to sell different things. We now are in the business of trying to get in doors that we can't walk through anymore. So we've got to try some different things. So I would just like to put a caveat also to mention that I think that a lot of times we're really thinking of, how do we find new families where yet our states are still not consistently serving all of our kids. And so I just think that right now, one of the things that we have to be thinking about, as much as we're thinking about ID&R, are those families that we have, is every family served, and are all of our kids getting service? Because if you're playing the numbers game, that that's counting the same. And so I think that in this time especially, it's really critical. I mean, migrant kids should always be served, but you look at our national numbers of how many kids are served, and sometimes it can be really low. And so we want to make sure that as much as we are focusing on still trying to find new families, we're also still trying to ensure that those that we have are being served and being served well. And I am a personal believer that the services that you have in your state are the easiest way to get new referrals, because if they're really good services, the families will reach out. It's easy to talk to the farmers, the businesses will see the real benefit for that. And so you can, it kind of comes back where it starts to be like a wheel, and it's a little bit easier to find one aspect because you have things already rolling and going really well. And so just making sure that that is really, really happening. And at the same time, recruiters can be well used to help leverage and get those beginning services started. Like, example, in one state, they were working on a project to try to do a virtual leadership institute, and the recruiters are the ones that are reaching out and talking to the families, and at the same time finding out, wow, so-and-so's moved, this one's come and gone, and getting, trying to convince them to participate in this program because they already had a rapport with them. And so I think that it's really important that we are leveraging our recruiters as much as possible. Moving on to our last little section that we have is we do have several scenarios resources that if states, let me go ahead and just open up the website for that. So if you go to our the IRC website, we still, here's some of the pandemic information that we have, but we have some mini quizzes here, and we also have the competency skills assessment, and that is also available to all states. That's a lot more formal than these little mini quizzes. This is just an assessment that covers all different areas of ID&R, and these are more focused on specific only qualifying moves or to join issues. But we added one more that is just general scenarios, and these were direct scenarios that our IRC states had seen, and they submitted the scenarios, and then our professional development work group worked on making sure that the scenarios made sense, and then putting the answer in. And we then put that on a site that you can actually go in. When you click on this, it will ask you for your email and your, you do a password, but then it will go in and actually give you the test, and you can get your results right away. And so it's just 10 scenarios. And people have said, well, if we're using the competency, if they're using that major test that we have and they've already used it, some of the scenarios are the same. And so we're including some new scenarios in this one just as a refresher course. I know a lot of areas are adding on new recruiters right now as just a way that you can go in and take that, and then it will give immediate feedback to the person who took the test, and they can specifically figure out whether they have any questions on that. So that is where we have that specifically on there. So we will continue to add new scenarios and update some of the things that we have on our website, and we want to continue to just kind of improve those ID&R resources that we have. So we will check back with that, and you can but that's the newest one that's been added on. So I think that's all the information that I have. I'm actually 20 minutes shorter than usually. I take about an hour. That's kind of where we are right now. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording right now.